A hacker toolkit built by artificial intelligence just figured out how to silently assassinate corporate security systems, blinding defenses before companies even know they're under attack.
Right, and we are literally watching the front lines of cyber warfare move from human speed to machine speed. I mean, the operational implications of that shift are just staggering.
Yeah, and the scariest part isn't even what this malware does to the victim once it gets inside. It's how the AI was trained to evade detection in the first place.
Exactly.
It's this terrifying automated training loop that we're going to unpack before we're done here.
We definitely will, but, tracking the evolution of these critical shifts always starts by looking at the foundation, which is the money.
Right. Always follow the money.
Always. And right now, the smart money is quietly abandoning one-off corporate advice in favor of permanent infrastructure control. So take Accenture's third quarter fiscal 2026 earnings.
Oh, yeah. They just released those.
Yeah, and they just beat estimates, pulling in $18.72 billion. That's a 6% year-over-year increase, with earnings per share sitting at $3.80.
Which is huge. But the actual story is kind of buried right there in the breakdown of that revenue.
Oh, absolutely.
Because managed services grew by 8%. That means the business of actually running daily operations has now officially overtaken traditional consulting as Accenture's top revenue generator.
Which is a massive mindset shift.
It really is. I mean, think about it like this. It's like a massive general contractor realizing the big money isn't in drawing up the blueprints or, even building the house.
Right.
The real leverage is in forcing the homeowner to pay a permanent monthly subscription to run the property's HVAC, the smart locks, and the security grid forever.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want to tell you how to build it anymore. They just want to run it for you permanently.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, it's a subscription that modern companies are increasingly desperate to pay.
Because it's just too much to handle internally.
Exactly. The sheer technological complexity required to run a global enterprise today has just far exceeded the capacity of most internal IT departments. I mean, you're talking about managing multi-cloud environments, integrating generative AI safely across thousands of endpoints, defending against state-sponsored security threats.
It's a nightmare for an in-house team.
It's completely overwhelming. So companies are effectively capitulating. They're being forced to offload the foundational day-to-day operations of their businesses to giants like Accenture just to keep the lights on.
Which honestly perfectly explains why Accenture is so aggressively expanding its total addressable market right now.
Right. They're pushing hard into that mid-market segment.
Yeah, the $240 billion mid-market segment. Yeah. They aren't just targeting the Fortune 500 anymore. They are scooping up the operational backbone of mid-sized companies that are just absolutely drowning in tech debt.
And they're also making these massive, highly targeted acquisitions in operational technology, or OT cybersecurity.
Ooh, OT. That's a crucial pivot to understand.
It really is, because we're not just talking about securing remote cloud servers or, employee laptops. OT means the software that physically controls things.
Like manufacturing plant floors.
Exactly. Plant floors, municipal power grids, global logistics hubs. Accenture sees that as companies outsource both their digital and physical operations, the security of those operations becomes the ultimate indispensable product.
So basically, if you're holding the keys to a company's physical factories and their cloud infrastructure, you're deeply embedded in their survival. You become unfireable.
Precisely. You are the infrastructure.
But, this level of massive operational complexity doesn't just strain IT departments. When a company reaches this global scale, the internal friction at the leadership level can be just as destructive.
Oh, 100%. Look at what is happening right now at Lululemon.
The proxy fight.
Yeah, they are dealing with a brutal proxy fight heading into their annual meeting of shareholders on June 25th, 2026. It's really the perfect example of what happens when the complex operational reality of a global behemoth clashes with the legacy vision of its past.
So the current board is urgently asking shareholders to vote the white card to protect their refreshed slate of nominees, right?
That's right.
And we're looking at serious heavy hitters with massive operational scale experience. You've got Chip Bergh, the former CEO of Levi Strauss.
Yep.
Essie Eggleston-Bracey, a major consumer brand executive from Unilever. And Thierry List, who's a veteran CFO with board stints at Microsoft and Visa.
Really impressive lineup, but Chip Wilson is aggressively trying to rip that control away.
Wait, Wilson, he's the founder, right? The one who stepped down a while ago.
Yeah, exactly. He stepped down as CEO back in 2005 and then was effectively forced off the board entirely in 2015 following, a whole series of brand-damaging public controversy.
Right, I remember that.
Well, now, a decade later, he is back. And he's trying to force his own slate of nominees, Laura Gentile, Eric Hirschberg, and Mark Maurer, onto the board.
And he's making some pretty wild demands, too, right? Demands that are frankly alarming from a modern corporate governance standpoint.
Oh, totally. Wilson is demanding non-public quarterly product reviews for himself and his son.
Wait, secret quarterly product reviews? But don't both of them actively invest in competing apparel ventures?
Yes, that's the glaring issue. Granting an activist founder with competing financial interests secret access to your forward-looking product pipeline is it's a massive red flag for any shareholder.
It completely bypasses the fiduciary structure designed to protect investors in a publicly traded company.
It's a governance nightmare.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Let's actually look at Lululemon's balance sheet.
Okay.
Yes, they hit $11.1 billion in revenue in 2025. But their North American growth softened significantly, dropping to 10% in fiscal 2024, and comparable sales actually declined slightly.
Right, the core market is stalling a bit.
Exactly. So if your core North American sales engine is stalling out, isn't a founder's aggressive original vision sometimes exactly the shock to the system a stalling company needs? I mean, we've seen the whole founder return narrative work wonders in the tech sector.
I get that. The founder magic narrative is super powerful, but this is honestly a textbook case of founder syndrome failing to scale.
Oh, so?
Well, Wilson is looking at an $11 billion, highly complex global enterprise through the outdated operational lens of the sub-$2 billion company he left behind in 2015.
So the mechanics of running a massive international supply chain and competing in global markets just require an entirely different operational discipline than bootstrapping a niche cult favorite yoga brand.
Exactly. And the board's strategy reflects that exact reality. They're banking on their incoming CEO, Heidi O'Neill.
Right, from Nike.
Yeah. She is the executive who previously built Nike's women's business into a multi-billion-dollar franchise and drove massive digital commerce growth. So the current board is betting on proven, scaled execution over a founder's nostalgia.
Makes sense.
They recognize that a global enterprise requires a highly structured, systemic, operational approach, not just a reliance on the gut instincts of a single visionary.
It's really a battle over who gets to dictate the strategy of a highly complex machine. But, while Lululemon is fighting off an internal ghost trying to grab the steering wheel, there's another story this week that shows what happens when that massive corporate complexity exposes an entirely different kind of vulnerability.
Yes. The Nintendo breach.
Right. This mid-June 2026 security incident involving Nintendo proves that attackers don't even need to pick the lock on your front door if they could just find the one third-party vendor who left a side window open.
It's a classic supply chain attack. The attack was executed by a threat group known as Shadowbyte, spelled with a $sign at the end. Right. And they managed to exfiltrate roughly 860 megabytes of highly sensitive data belonging to Nintendo of America. They set a June 15th deadline for a $2 million ransom demand.
Now, 860 megabytes doesn't sound like a massive data breach by pure volume, but the actual content of that data is an absolute nightmare for any HR department.
It's incredibly invasive.
We're talking about highly sensitive employee W-9 tax forms, PDF bank statements, and internal workplace feedback reports. It's just a total violation of employee privacy.
But the wildest twist here is that Nintendo's actual corporate network was never breached.
Nope, not at all.
Their gaming servers are fine, their consumer data is completely untouched. So how did they get the employee data?
The compromise happened entirely within a platform called TINYpulse. It's a third-party employee engagement and survey application owned by WebMD Health Services that Nintendo utilizes.
Wow.
Yeah. The attackers completely bypassed Nintendo's hardened primary defenses by targeting a secondary vendor. To put that in perspective for you listening, this is like a bank constructing a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art vault with laser grids, biometric locks, and armed guards.
Yes.
And the criminals look at the vault, realize it's far too difficult to crack, so they just hijack the catering truck that delivers lunch to the bank and steal all the tellers' wallets while the staff is eating.
That is exactly what happened. They bypassed the primary security entirely by attacking the supply chain.
It's brilliant, but terrifying.
And it highlights the severe reality of modern supply chain vulnerabilities. As companies scale their operations, like we just discussed with Accenture and Lululemon, they integrate dozens, sometimes hundreds, of third-party platforms to manage HR, payroll, logistics, and feedback.
And the threat actors know this.
Too, they map out those vast vendor ecosystems, identify the weakest link in the chain, and strike there.
And when Nintendo predictably refused to pay that $2 million ransom, the hackers entirely pivoted their strategy. They didn't just walk away. They directly threatened to extort TINYpulse by leaking those private employee messages.
Which represents a fundamental evolution in digital extortion. I mean, historically, cybercrime was primarily about operational disruption.
Right, like deploying ransomware, locking up critical internal systems, and demanding payment for the decryption key.
Exactly. But now it is increasingly about the psychological weaponization of private data.
So the primary threat isn't that your servers go down and you can't process transactions anymore. The threat is reputational ruin and the complete destruction of employee trust.
Precisely.
Like if your workforce knows their W-9s, personal banking details, and private workplace complaints are being auctioned off on the dark web just because of a third-party vendor you chose to integrate, I mean, the internal damage to corporate culture is catastrophic.
And threat actors know that reputational leverage and the threat of internal chaos are often more effective at forcing a payout than traditional operational downtime.
But as sophisticated as these supply chain attacks are, they still rely on finding a backdoor or a weak vendor. But the apex threat actors, the ones pushing cyber warfare to machine speed, they're developing tools that don't bother looking for backdoors at all. They just walk right up to the frontline security software, look it in the eye, and turn it off.
And this perfectly brings us back to the terrifying reality we teased at the start of this deep dive.
Yes, the rapid proliferation of what the industry is calling EDR killers.
Right. So ESET researchers are currently tracking around 90 active EDR killers out in the wild.
And these are highly specialized malware variants.
Exactly. They're designed with one exclusive purpose: to hunt down and terminate endpoint detection and response software. That's your EDR.
So they silently blind the system so the actual ransomware payload can be deployed in complete silence.
Exactly. And the dominant method right now, accounting for 54 of those 90 tracked killers, is a technique known as BYOVD, or Bring Your Own Vulnerable Driver.
Okay, BYOVD. To understand why this is so dangerous, we have to look at how it explains the fundamental hierarchy of a computer's operating system. So if the EDR is the state-of-the-art security system tightly guarding the OS, how does a random vulnerable driver manage to just bypass it and shut it off?
It's actually a very clever trick. Hackers package their malware alongside a legitimate, legally signed driver.
Wait, like a real driver?
Yeah. Often it's an outdated version of a hardware utility or an old anti-cheat engine from a video game. Because the driver carries a legitimate publisher signature, the Windows operating system inherently trusts it. It allows that driver to load at the kernel level.
And the kernel is the absolute core of the operating system. It's the brain.
It is.
So they aren't just getting past the lobby security desk with a fake ID. They're putting on the building manager's uniform so they can walk directly into the master control room and manually sever the cables to all the security cameras.
That's a great way to put it. Once that legitimate but outdated driver is loaded into the kernel, the hackers exploit a known vulnerability within that old driver code.
So the vulnerability grants them kernel-level privileges.
Exactly. From that position of ultimate authority, they sit higher up the chain of command than the EDR software itself. They literally just order the operating system to forcefully terminate the security agent.
That is wild, but the threat landscape is already moving past that, right? The sources highlight a massive spike in driverless killers.
Yes. Tools with names like EDR Silencer and EDR Freeze, they don't even bother dropping into the kernel.
Really? How do they work then?
They just manipulate the Windows filtering platform to block the communication between the local machine and the security vendor's cloud. Or they freeze the EDR software process entirely in place.
So the security dashboard in the IT department still displays a reassuring green checkmark, but the endpoint is actually totally blind and isolated.
You've got it. The technical mechanics of these killers are deeply concerning, but the real paradigm shift is in how they are being manufactured.
This is the AI connection.
Yes. Threat actors are now utilizing advanced AI agents to automate the creation and refinement of these EDR killers.
Okay, this is the loop we have to unpack because we're hearing that hackers are using advanced large language models like Claude Opus and AI-assisted coding environments like Cursor.
They are?
But wait, if I try to ask one of those major commercial models to write a script to destroy a corporate network, the safety guardrails kick in immediately and block the prompt.
Of course they do.
So how are threat actors weaponizing AI models that are actively and heavily restricted?
By fundamentally changing how they prompt the model, they aren't actually asking the AI to write malicious ransomware from scratch.
Okay, so what are they doing?
They're utilizing the AI as an ultra-fast, highly analytical developer's assistant. The hackers feed the AI legitimate, publicly available security research.
Oh, wow.
White papers and blog posts from cybersecurity firms that detail theoretical evasion techniques or newly discovered vulnerabilities.
So they literally feed it the defender's own research. The AI reads the public blog post, extracts the core concepts, and then automatically maps those exact behaviors to the MIT or ATT&CK framework so it can categorize the techniques.
Exactly. And once the technique is mapped, the AI automates the testing environment. It builds a virtual test lab, writes the initial evasion code, launches it against a simulated EDR solution, and monitors the telemetry.
And if it gets caught?
If the EDR blocks the execution, the AI instantly analyzes the failure logs, iteratively rewrites its own logic, and executes again.
It's running hundreds of sandbox simulations at machine speed. It compresses what used to be months of painstaking manual evasion research by highly skilled human engineers into a few days of automated, relentless iteration.
And we are seeing this actively deployed by groups like the Warlock Gang.
The Warlock Gang.
Yeah, they are utilizing AI-assisted EDR killers that literally cycle through various device names and evasion tactics on the fly, applying a rapid trial and error mechanism until they find the exact microscopic vulnerability that allows them to slip through and bypass the defenses.
This completely democratizes advanced cyber warfare. I mean, because the AI is handling the incredibly complex heavy lifting of kernel-level evasion research, the technical skill barrier to execute these attacks basically disappears.
It vanishes.
Ransomware affiliates can just hop onto the black market, buy a highly sophisticated AI-refined EDR killer, run the executable, and deploy their payloads. They don't need to know how the Windows kernel actually works or how to code in C++. They just need to know how to buy the tool.
Right. And it forces a total recalibration of how organizations approach security. If attackers can automate their evasion testing in isolated labs to guarantee success before they ever launch an attack, defenders can no longer implicitly trust the signals or the silence coming from their own networks.
Because that green check mark on an admin console might just mean the security agent has been perfectly neutralized.
Exactly.
Which means the landscape is shifting rapidly. And we need to translate all of this into concrete dates and fallout that you need to monitor. So let's look at the week ahead. First, circle June 25th, 2026 on your calendar.
That is the date of Lululemon's annual meeting of shareholders. This is when the votes will be officially tallied to determine if Chip Wilson's rebel slate of nominees successfully infiltrates the board or if the current management's white proxy cards hold the line.
That's going to be tense.
Very. The outcome will be a massive indicator of how modern retail giants navigate the disruptive influence of activist founders in a stalling market.
And ongoing throughout next week, you need to closely track the TINYpulse and Nintendo fallout.
Yeah.
With the attacker's June 15th deadline having already passed, the cybersecurity industry is waiting to see if Shadowbyte actually pulls the trigger and leaks those 860 megabytes of private employee tax forms and bank statements.
Yeah, how TINYpulse and Nintendo manage the potential leak and the subsequent regulatory and internal employee fallout will set a very clear precedent for how organizations handle complex supply chain extortion moving forward.
Absolutely. Now, I want to leave you with one final forward-looking thought to mull over as you wrap up your day. We just mapped out how AI is currently acting as an automated, iterative penetration tester for hackers in isolated, closed lab environments.
Right.
But what happens when that AI becomes sophisticated enough to actively rewrite and modify the malware live in real time while it is already moving inside a company's network? If a piece of malware can see the security guards reacting and autonomously change its own code on the fly to become invisible again, how do you defend against a threat that adapts faster than a human can perceive it? It's something to think about the next time you look at the little green check mark on your security software and assume you are perfectly safe.